Okay, so this documentary that we watched, it I was it wasn't ideal. The first half of it focused a lot on art, and then it did get into his other things. But I do like how it gave us some overall, just an overall feel for what was going on in the Renaissance in general. And so since this class is kind of categorized as a history class, this is good for us. It goes along with the Reformation also, because the Reformation was during the Renaissance. The Renaissance, let me just start with a whiteboard here. The Renaissance is like this larger umbrella, and the Reformation was part of that umbrella, right? So let's draw a cute little umbrella. There is our Renaissance umbrella. And Renaissance is a really great spelling word if you don't know how to spell it. Is that it?
Online.
Okay. Okay, so Renaissance is a big umbrella. What I mean by that is it had to do with a lot of breakthroughs, a lot of new thought, a lot of new developments in multiple fields, right? So the Reformation was the breakthrough in religious thought. What other fields were there that we saw affected by the Renaissance? And if you don't know this, it's fine, right? Some of you have already studied this. Some of you, this might be your first time hearing about it. Great. So let's just talk about it.
A lot of art and science was
Thank you.
happened during the ride. I think just culture in general changed quite a lot as a consequence of that.
Yeah, I mean, culture is like a conglomerate of all these
Yeah.
things, right? Like actually, that's an interesting point. You could probably look at any country in the world, like, well, what's the culture in China? Well, it depends. What's their take on medicine? What's their take on religion?
Yeah.
What's their take on art and music? That's their culture, right?
What
Mm.
about philosophy and astronomy? That was pretty big too. Like
Yeah,
right
so
away.
Yeah.
astronomy goes with the science. I teach this other class called Pyramid Project that deals with philosophy and science and math. We should do that class next year, guys. Are we missing anything? What about, you guys know the guy named William Shakespeare, right?
Oh yeah.
Literature. Now let's see. Did theater evolve during the Renaissance? I'm sure it did, but I
Hmm.
know they had a good theater before that. I'm not sure what the differences were. Maybe we'll just include that under the literature umbrella.
Well, Shakespeare happened, and he was a great
Mm.
playwright, so maybe.
Yeah.
I guess he like wrote the greatest love story in the world, so maybe like something like that. Who knows?
So, yeah, let's break this down because I mean, we'll talk about Leonardo da Vinci, but I want to talk about like all these things. So, I want to get to Shakespeare today. There's some Shakespeare experts in this class. When was the Renaissance?
I think it was like 14 to 1500s
Yeah, 14 to 1600s,
or 1500s or something. I don't know.
right? We already talked about
That
Joan of
was
Arc. She's a Renaissance figure. Should be
yeah.
a Renaissance religious figure, but she was
Oh, what was she?
a ways before the Reformation. So we've got, tell me some names you associate with the Renaissance. Joan of Arc, all the all the Reformation figures we've been talking about. So we'll just say like Martin Luther, etc.
Hmm.
Okay, art, science, just pick and choose. I'll put Shakespeare under literature.
Galileo.
Yes. I think Newton,
Leonardo,
Copernicus.
Was he?
Leonardo da Vinci, art.
Oh, you know what? For philosophy, that's supposed to be political philosophy. Do we know anything about political philosophy from the Renaissance? Because the ideas that formed
Hmm.
America, they came during this time. Do you guys know about that? So, John Locke, and then the French guy Montesquieu. Have you guys heard about that? Montesquieu. Uh, I know a little bit about that. That's one thing I would like to study myself and then teach in the future to get more into the political philosophy and like the foundings of America. Let's see. Michelangelo, all the Ninja
Yeah.
Turtles are the Renaissance artists, right? Let's see. We had
Yeah.
Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael. Who's the other Ninja Turtle?
Got
Why
no
don't they
idea.
have a Da Vinci Ninja Turtle? That's not fair.
Don't know.
Okay. Yeah, those are the names I came up with. And I don't know who it is put under architecture. But Donatello, did I miss Donatello? Okay, cool. So a really nice umbrella, a lot going on. Now, what part of the world are we talking about?
Really all over Europe.
All over Europe.
Yeah. And I think France as well was very
I
central.
guess you would say
And,
Europe was the most in line, the most developed area of the world at this time, right?
I guess.
Because that was the Western world. There wasn't a whole lot of talk about North and South America. So Europe, that was the West. That was the development,
Well,
the new
I
thinkers.
think China at that time had a lot of technological advancements already, and Europe was right on the heels of that.
You're right. I think Europe is just where we focus. Like that's what we know the most about. It would be
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
just to study more what was going on in Asia during that time.
Because I mean, the printing
Hinduism.
press was invented in China in like the 1500s, so
Okay, and then it came
they were
to
getting on
Germany.
stuff quick.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's tie this in with leadership. Now that we have these names and figures and areas, what does this have to do with leadership?
People were like leading the Renaissance and coming up with all these new ideas and new scientific advancements and all sorts of stuff.
Now, as we've been discussing leadership for several months now, it doesn't just mean being a nice person, right? Like it can mean all sorts of things. And being educated is a really important part of leadership. But also, they're leading the way in their fields. They're exploring new ideas. And that takes some courage and boldness because whenever you have a new idea, people are going to fight against you at first, right? Have you heard this famous quote? It's not that famous enough that I know it, right? But it's like at first an idea is mocked and then it's criticized and then it's accepted, something like that. Like all great new ideas are always called blasphemous at the beginning.
Well, it starts with being ignored, but then when it gains
Then they get mocked.
following,
Yeah.
then they get mocked.
Cool. Okay, what does the word Renaissance mean?
Rebirth.
Cool. I wonder if that's what it literally, I'm gonna look this up. I wonder what it literally
I
means.
think that's what it literally means, just rebirth.
In Latin or something like that.
Yeah.
Hey Reed, have you taken the Renaissance and Reformation class?
I have not, no.
But you know what I'm talking about?
About the class?
Renaissance and Reformation with Tracy Hyde because Richin took it through Anchor Academy. That's why I was wondering if you've taken it.
I have not, no.
Okay. Well, you're brilliant either way. You're right. It means rebirth. Okay, cool. So now let's zero in. No, let's talk about Shakespeare first. So who's our Shakespeare experts in this class?
Here,
Elizabeth and Taylor. You guys tell us about Shakespeare. What was so like revolutionary about Shakespeare?
Well, I hear it said a lot that before Shakespeare, plays all had like the same kind of plot, and he kind of changed it up.
Like what playwrights can we even think about before Shakespeare? I'm thinking about there's ancient Greeks, Sophocles, right?
Sophocles.
There's yeah, whatever. That's all I can think of as far as ancient theater.
I learned about
Sorry,
this.
what?
I learned about this a few years ago in a theater class that wasn't based on Shakespeare, but just like ancient theater. I don't really remember anything from that class.
Anything else revolutionary about Shakespeare? He still had all men playing the parts, right?
Yeah.
He wrote the greatest love story in the world. And he was famous for tragedies. He also was alive around the time of the bubonic plague, I think.
Okay. Did that influence his writings, do you think? Is that why everybody dies? Just kidding.
No,
Probably. Like a lot of people died, and pretty sure it's normal. Who knows?
I don't know if it influenced his writing, but it definitely influenced the business. Like, you can't get anyone to attend a play if everyone's
Yeah,
afraid of
so he
getting sick and
succeeded
dying.
despite that. Or I wonder if it helped his business because do you know what I've heard a history professor say? But this is a different time period. During the Great Depression, this is my husband's grandpa. He was a history professor. He said that entertainment was the last industry to fall during the Great Depression. People were saving money on food and clothing, whatever else, so that they could afford entertainment. And that really speaks to the human soul and how we need to feel enriched and enlightened through things like theater and music and dance, right? So that's a cool fact. Okay, Shakespeare is seen as totally brilliant. What's so amazing about his literature?
Can't super speak to the quality of his literature a lot, but one thing I did learn recently is he apparently invented a lot of words that we still use today.
Okay.
Some simple stuff like bedroom,
Oh, really?
eyeball, apparently. Yeah. Which I had no idea, but
Yeah, he
he
created
just
a lot
invented
of,
them.
English language. Like he made up
Hmm.
like all these words, like Reed was saying, like also toilet, like
Hmm.
and things like that. Like he made up all those words. I can't remember the
Wow.
percentage, but it's pretty high of
Like 30% of our current English language came from him or something like that.
yeah, something like that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Made the knock knock joke.
Really?
Really?
Yeah,
Oh.
and he did a lot of other like terminology, like phrases that we say today,
Yeah.
jokes, stuff like that. Like he like you don't realize how much Shakespeare actually influenced the English language until like you study Shakespeare. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I've heard us say that he's brilliant
Oh.
because his work reflects humanity, human nature, in a way that nobody else can really capture, right? And what does that mean? What are we talking about when we say human nature?
Natural desires and wants and like the way that we act, like he was able to portray it in a new way than what most people had portrayed, like which were probably more boring. If Shakespeare blew up super big, they're like, oh, there's actually someone who can relate to me, which is like the purpose of like music and of stories is to speak to an audience, to really speak to them, to impact them in some way. And so he was probably just more in tune with what the people wanted to, or like what their culture wanted, and that was he was able to make it more meaningful to them.
Yeah. So let's see, he has comedies which are full of misunderstandings and mix-ups. Any other commentary about comedies, guys? I think we can learn a lot from that. Personally, I really like the tragedies.
Hmm.
I'm just like, I'm a more intense person. I like heavier stuff. I like substantial stuff. I
Yeah.
think I like heavy books and I like heavy music. I'm sorry, but I just like emotional stuff because I feel like it pulls us in and we can relate to it. And then with tragedies and then other novels that have a bad ending that go awry, it really teaches us what not to do. It warns us,
Yeah.
right?
I hope
So
you can't relate to Killing Royalty.
I can't relate to Killing Royalty. Yeah, that's funny. I said it. Well, maybe I relate because I'm talking about like deeper human emotion than just like, oops, I married the wrong woman and a fairy put a spell on me, or I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
like. I'm not really into supernatural stuff in that way either. Just like lighthearted. It has its place, and some people really enjoy it, but I'm not really into that stuff. Okay, anything else we can say about Shakespeare? And of course, he's just a great writer as far as rhythm, flow, use of language, and all of that. I took a Shakespeare course in college, but unfortunately, I don't remember all the details, and it's still something I need to brush up on.
The
All
other
right.
thing is he used a lot of literary structures too, like poetry and different types of different things that weren't
Yeah.
commonly seen other than like in like the Bible, for example.
That's interesting. You know, I
Mm.
never realized how much poetry the Bible has until I got a new I got a new translation of the Bible, and it's written as a poem. So instead of just verse by verse, it'll indent and show you the lines and the stanzas of the poetry. Like, wow, like so much of this is poetry. It's amazing to just appreciate the writers and their literary techniques. No, sorry, Reed. Reed, go ahead. You were on mute. Can you say it again if you were talking, Reed?
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just thinking to myself.
Okay. Okay, so now let's go to Da Vinci. Leonardo. There's a museum in downtown Salt Lake called the Leonardo. It's about art and science. So, what are all the things? Art and science. What else? He is known for a whole lot of things. And before we list them, let's just say, like, this is the definition of the word Renaissance man. I really love this word. It's just somebody who is so talented in so many different areas. They're so curious. They just want to learn. Like a lot of you might have your favorite school subject or your favorite special interest is it really zero in on. And so some people have the depth of intelligence and education. Other people have the breadth. I mean, he had depth and breadth because he was deep on all these things too. But I think he really is the model of leadership as far as education and curiosity to really look into all of these things and be so just be so interested and inspired by the world around us that let's not just major in one thing. Why not major in 10 things, right? So here's my list. I did have some help from Google. What is cartography?
Isn't that
Map making.
maps?
Map making. Do you guys know the meaning of all these other words? All these other sciences?
Yeah.
Flight. Okay, wait, what's the proper word for flight? What aero
Aviation.
something?
The
Why can't I think of it?
Aerodynamics.
Aviation. Why am I thinking of aerodynamics?
Aviation. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just really inspiring all the many things that he got into. What I found interesting from the documentary, actually, no, let's hear from you. What did you find as far as his background, his growing up years, his education, anything at all? What stood out to you and was interesting? How did he get his education?
He, I don't know for a lot of the other stuff. I know for art, he apprenticed under someone for quite a few years, about 8, I think.
So this was
So he's
not the
got a
usual
lot of
route,
experience
right?
there.
The usual route was school.
Yeah.
Even at this time, I know this is pretty early on for schools, but why wasn't he allowed to go to school?
Because his artwork was too different.
Oh, that's interesting. I caught something else.
No, it was because he had, like, I'm pretty sure something wrong with his brain.
Huh.
Like, it seemed like he had ADHD, just the way he would, like, start a bunch of paintings and then leave them
Oh,
unfinished.
that's interesting. Okay, so what I remember from the documentary was that he was in low social standing because he was born out of wedlock. So his family had this public shame and he wasn't allowed in the schools because of that.
My joke. You need to look again. You just look at mine. Because I want the colors different colors.
His father was a lawyer though, so he does have a family background of education. And so even if he couldn't go to school, I'm sure his home was a culture, an educational environment. What do I mean by that? Can you guys relate in your own homes?
Well, because he does so many different things, like maybe he had like creativity was inspired, like in his house, or like different core fundamental principles that like homeschoolers like have this, right? But a lot of different families have different types of like values or strengths to build it off of. And where he did so many different things, maybe it was like curiosity and imagination, because he was able to do all those things. Whereas some people maybe um, they specify in like religion or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, every home is different. Like they have their own unique family culture based on their parents' backgrounds and interests. What do they specialize in?
I think it was also the fact that going off of like what Bentley said, I think it was just that he was surrounded by different stuff than what the other kids were experiencing. Because since he didn't go to school, he didn't learn the same things and didn't like learn the same mindset. And so maybe being like having a lawyer as a dad, he might have known the law more than the others. And also the fact that his mom might have been artistic or something like that, but he would have been surrounded by something different instead of what everyone else was. What's the word? That's with an
Just being
E.
indoctrinated with, maybe, or just the popular culture of the day. I don't know. Well, the popular learnings of the day, right? So someone who's brilliant and they're going to be innovative and come up with new stuff. See how it helps to be outside of the system? Because in the system, they're telling you what to think. On your own, you're able to foster more of a creativity where you have more flexible, more open-minded thinking, where now you're curious, you're asking questions instead of being told the answers. So that's how I see it. In school, you're told a lot of answers, you're given a lot of information. Hopefully in homeschool, depending on the culture of your family, are you encouraged to ask questions and just seek after your own interests, right? To go discover the world rather than just be fed and programmed with information.
And also like in history, you can see examples of this, like Alexander Hamilton. He didn't grow up normal. He was on an island and he was abandoned by his dad and his mother died. And he didn't get like a normal education and he became like a very, very good like politician and very, very popular with the colonists. And same with like a lot of others, can't think of them, but anyway. Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln was another like really popular figure that had like another like very different background from most people. He lived in a small community in a log cabin and he didn't go to like public school really. He just had like I think there was four fundamental books that he had, like the Bible, the dictionary, and like two other books that he had. And he would read over them over and over and over and over. And that's where all of his education came from, was just simply those four books and then, what he was taught at home. But even though he didn't have like tons of resources, he was still able to like with what he had, because he was at home and he wasn't influenced by what everybody else, he like matured in his education a different way than the others.
Yeah, I remember him being a huge reader. Elizabeth and Taylor have been big readers, and for a lot of years, it made it easier for me. Like I didn't have to like structure homeschool so much. It was just like, let's go to the library and get a bunch of books on a variety of topics. Just read, And if you're a big reader and if you're gifted with a mind to just like remember everything you've ever read, then you're going to naturally be a walking encyclopedia, and that counts as school, right? Just by reading books. The documentary made it sound like he had a disorder. Well, maybe he did. I mean, I didn't catch that, but just a lot of times brilliant people are going to be neurodivergent. And that's just the pattern in the world, right? Like you have savants. A savant is somebody who's exceptionally brilliant, specifically in one or two areas, but then they might be weak or socially awkward in other areas. So maybe that's the autism spectrum. But if we look at history, a lot of brilliant people fell under that pattern. Who is this other? Sorry, I read a book about this other painter and I can't remember his name. Oh, but he was like super depressed and withdrawn, and he like lived alone inside of his house, and his paintings were all kind of weird. I thought his name was something like Da Vinci, like another D. I can't think of his name. He's a famous painter. But anyways, when I read about him, I was just like, whoa, he was autistic, and not in a bad way, but just it's interesting to see these brilliant minds coming out, but then they have struggles too, right? They might be socially withdrawn. And with an artist or, even in literature, like their works would reflect that, maybe some of their struggles.
Was it Picasso?
I don't think so. No. And I think it was an American. Uh, yeah, who's another painter? I swear it starts with a D. Okay. List of famous painters.
Donatello, maybe?
So tell me why, what does this have to do with leadership, self-educating? Or one thing that stood out to me is like, if you're culturally shamed, let's go back to that shame. Like your family carries this stigma, this social shaming, and you could let that get you down and you could hate yourself or you could feel really discouraged about life. But he didn't, it doesn't seem like he let that get him down at all. Like, did he grow up with like, well, I'm an illegitimate child, so I have no future at all, right? He didn't waste any time feeling sorry for himself. It seems like he just jumped on this bandwagon of being proactive and like, if I can't go to school, I'm going to educate myself and I'm just going to be curious about the world around me. And he just excelled so much by being this unique, amazing person that he is. And there's a leadership lesson right there, right? Like, what are your gifts? And how can you just embrace who you are rather than saying, well, poor me, I don't fit in with this mold, or I'm not this, or I'm not this. But like, what are you? Can you discover that? This is the time of your life in your teenage years. Discover who you are and get some pride in that, like some confidence in that, some excitement in like all the ways you can develop your gifts and offer those to the world. So that's a big leadership lesson right there. Okay, so I don't know a lot about this concept, but I know his paintings carry this kind of motto of virtue and honor. Does anybody else know about that? I'm curious. And not that it was like written on his paintings, but his paintings reflected that. I guess education as a whole is supposed to reflect virtue and honor, but of course, education can be anything. I could get educated in something that's not virtuous, but just seeking enlightenment. And this goes back to the meaning of the Renaissance, like a rebirth with enlightenment, with new curiosities. Do you see the virtue in that? Just because it seems so wholesome, I guess. Any other comments on why uh, the Renaissance would reflect virtue and honor?
Maybe because it's like it was the time where like a lot of philosophy started happening, like too, like of what virtue and honor was. And so maybe it's looked at that way because it's kind of the time that those ideas started of being importance.
Anybody else? At one point, the documentary said that he struggled to find patrons enough to buy his paintings to assist, like, so he can live off of this. So, do you remember what he did at that point? He took on his own apprentice. So I guess he got paid for doing that. Okay, what are his famous paintings? What can we think of when we think of Leonardo da Vinci and his paintings?
The Mona Lisa.
And the Last Supper.
Yes, The Last Supper. Did it say he painted himself? Oh, it was in the painting of the Magi, which isn't a famous one. I mean, not famous enough that I would know it. That's interesting that he painted himself in one of his paintings. The Last Supper, this part was really interesting. No, I'm not an art person, right? I don't know a whole lot about art history or techniques or anything, but this was really interesting that he was saying he painted the shadows in a certain way so that the light would land on Christ's face So he's able, I mean, art is a lot about symbolism, right? So it's not just showing a picture, but what story or what impression are you creating through that picture? So by having Christ's face lit up and the shadows are around him, I mean, of course, that has obvious inspirational meaning. Oh, it said he painted Judas to look like a guy that he doesn't like. That was funny.
No, he just threatened to.
Oh, okay. He always has that power to make a world famous painting and then you're in it.
Well, so do writers.
Yeah, well, with the same name or not, but just to represent somebody a certain way, huh? The David statue, that is the naked man that we've seen. Isn't that outside? No, it's not. Okay. This says this is why the David statue is so important. Again, it has a message. The statue focuses on the youthful strength and determination of David, capturing him in a moment of heroic contemplation. So I think it was saying that this was him as a youth before he went to fight Goliath. So it's trying to capture just the way he felt confident and inspired, right? He's contemplating becoming a hero. So I can appreciate that more now. Like I never really knew the background of that. And you guys know the famous man sketch that has like 4 arms and 4 legs because it's almost like jumping jacks. So that's what I think of when I think of Leonardo da Vinci. And then it mentions the ceiling on the Sistine Chapel. Is that the same ceiling as Michelangelo or not? I gotta look this up.
I think so.
So then, did they work on it together is the question. Yeah, this is saying Michelangelo. Maybe they work together in some way. Interesting. Because the documentary said Da Vinci. And it's the same place. All right. So the last thing about him is he has these famous notebooks. And I'm not sure if this was in the documentary. Did it mention his notebooks? Maybe it mentioned it quickly. Notebooks. Like Bach. Bach had notebooks, right? I'm sure everybody has notebooks. But I think his notebooks have lasted. I wonder where they are now. But I mean, he just has these famous notebooks. It's a collection of writings, sketches, diagrams to give him. This is where we see his ideas, mostly for his inventions. And so we see some, I remember reading about this. We see some sketches that he didn't actually make. So it's just kind of cool to look at what his ideas were and then how other things came about after that. But it's some notes for his art as well as his science. His writing style, a lot of brilliant minds are also philosophers. Because if you're reflecting on the world and humanity, you naturally come up with some philosophy and some really nice quotable quotes. I like doing this with my literature thinkers, but here are some quotes from Da Vinci. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. What do you think about that one? Is that true? That's interesting for a scientist to say because scientists are usually understanding complexities, right? They're able to work with complicated ideas and patterns. So for him to say that simplicity is ultimate sophistication. Any thoughts on that?
It definitely reminds me of the whole thing that like creativity thrives in a box, and how under simplicity and restrictions we can figure out a lot more to do with just these little bits that we have.
That's actually a cool quote. Where did you hear that? Creativity
I
thrives
have
in a
no
box.
idea.
They got to find a way to get out of the box, right? Is that the
I don't know.
Okay, another
But just
quote
the
is
idea of like
Uh-huh.
in like puzzle design or whatever, putting restrictions on something. Or like with magic systems and fantasy even. The more restrictions it has, the easier it is to like write it and have compelling problems and solutions.
Yeah.
Is the whole thing. It's interesting.
Okay. He also says learning never exhausts the mind. That might be debatable. I feel like if I study for a few hours, like, do you ever have these days and just like, I need to do something mindless, like put on a dumb comedy because like I just can't think anymore today.
Absolutely. Well, we don't think of like thinking as an exhausting task, but your brain uses 20% of your body's entire energy supply, so
Burn
it can exhaust
calories
you.
by studying, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like focusing is an
I mean, it
exhausting
can
task. So maybe it depends on,
literally
are you
exhaust you.
learning something that you are naturally driven to learn? Like it's easy, you're in flow, or are you learning something that someone else imposed upon you? Do you see what I mean? That takes a lot more willpower to get yourself to focus on something that you weren't naturally inclined to do.
I think of it kind of more in like a long-term thing instead of like literal sense. Like
Yeah.
in the way of like we'll never burn out if we're always being creative like in our lives. Like it's not for me, it's not about that hour by hour or I'm tired. I think it's meaning more of like your life's mission or like a bigger period of time where if you're always curious and if you're always learning and expanding and growing in different ways, then you'll have so much more drive in life because you'll have
Yes.
more of a mission and more of a focus.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think mental health all comes down to, I mean, could we say curiosity? Because doesn't that bring you purpose and joy? To look at the world around you as an inspiring place rather than a depressing place. So that would give you mental health. That's my theory. I guess I would have to try that out, test it out on some subjects. Any volunteers? He also says, time stays long enough for anyone who will use it. What does that mean? That's kind of deep. Time stays long enough for anyone who will use it. Feels like it ties into what you were just saying.
Maybe like some people like waste their time and others won't. Like if you take that time and use it like it's a gift instead of, leisurely like, oh, I can do it later, or not like doing what you're supposed to, I guess. It means a lot more if you're doing it when there are other temptations around you, or if you're getting into the temptations and not spending that time like in using it wisely.
Yeah, then it's wasted, right? Yeah.
Wasted time.
I feel like it also goes back to like, okay, all the time whenever I do like so I'm a writer, so I write a lot, and like I've had a couple of friends be like, "Oh, I wish I could be like you. I wish I could write all the time." I'm like, "Why don't you?" Because I'm so busy. I'm busy during this hour and this hour and this hour, and I'm like, "Well, you're not driving in the car during this hour, so write during that hour." And like really when you make time for things that you enjoy and love, like time can be found instead of saying I don't have time for things. Like find the time for things. You don't have to cancel something to make the time. There's always going to be at least an hour of or 2 or 3 hours of downtime between everything else you're doing. That's my opinion, at least.
And if something's really important to you, you would just find yourself making time to do it. Like you would stay up later that night because you couldn't pull yourself away, right? But I also think what you're saying is it speaks to having more of an unstructured life, like just not. I think so many of us fill our time with things that we just feel like we're supposed to do, things that society expects us to do. And maybe if we give ourselves permission, like what if I back away from that and instead let myself follow my dreams and my passions, right? Like just give yourself permission. Your life doesn't have to be a scheduled box like the public school system says, Your mom says that there's always time. Sorry, I lost that. There's always time for the things we love. Yeah, for sure. Also, that quote made me think of, or this concept, it makes me think of innovation. You can expand the time in your life. Isn't that what innovation is all about? Like, are you guys in my finance class? Island is, Elizabeth and Taylor, when we're reading this book about economics. And it's showing us that if you invest time for innovation, you just freed up a whole bunch of free time. Like, aren't you so glad? This is the irony of modern life. We have all these machines to do things that we used to do by hand, and yet we still think that we're so busy, right? But I don't know, just on a simple scale, is there a way we can apply that to our own lives? What can we innovate to make our day more efficient? I don't know, something to ponder.
I don't know.
Get AI to write your
I
essays
can't
for you.
think of any specifics, but I am
AI was
always
invented
stupid.
to
I'm always
do
on.
the boring jobs so that we don't have to, so we can do more creative things, but instead it does the opposite.
Like,
Yeah.
Oh, it does the creative things. Yeah. Sorry,
Just
Greed,
literally
go
can't.
ahead.
But yeah, I've always like tried to do micro optimization and just little tasks I have that I need to repeat a bunch. So maybe I don't like completely restructure stuff, but I just look at, okay, where can I like shave off a few seconds here, or where can I combine these two things and like multitask it in a way that doesn't lose productivity, but it still saves time. Just get little
Mhm.
things like that, so it's over time builds up a lot, and I can just save time that way.
Yeah, efficiency is an interesting conversation. I feel like
Mm.
in my life, I'm prone to multitasking so much that I'm losing the joy. Like I need to do the opposite. Like I need to learn to be more present and to leave myself unscheduled so I can just be present rather than always like I'm always layering things. Like I'm gonna listen to an audiobook while I walk the dog, or I'm gonna do this and this and this. But maybe I like, do you ever have this experience when whatever your technology is, your tablet or your phone or your computer, like let's say it dies and you're like, oh, I just have to sit with my thoughts now, and that's also really healthy.
Oh, yeah, no.
yeah. Yeah, parents, no fans are always like, boredom is good for you. So it's really interesting to like see like, okay, maybe when your phone dies, let's see, maybe if it's the same thing, you know? It's really interesting because they're like, go outside and yeah, go touch the grass. And
Yeah, connect with the world around you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unplug. Okay, here's another quote. It's easier to resist at the beginning than at the end. What does that mean?
At the beginning of a task, you're fresh into it, and you can think of all sorts of reasons why you shouldn't do this. I don't have enough time, or it's too hard, or whatever. But once you've been doing it for a while, then it's like, well, I've already been doing it for like a month, so I can definitely do it again one last time.
And it's
So just,
once you get started, it's hard to stop.
yeah,
I mean, so this can be a good
good
thing or a
momentum
bad thing,
there.
right?
Mhm.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting, Elizabeth. Okay. Because I was thinking more like in terms of addiction, like it's easier to drop a bad habit before you get so far into it. Or this idea
Oh,
that as soon as you realize you're
mhm.
on the wrong path, you need to turn around. Don't wait until you get further down that path to turn around, right? But like Elizabeth is saying, it's easier to resist at the beginning than at the end. You could also reframe that to mean I'm gonna feel the most resistance at the beginning, but if I can push through that, it'll be more comfortable and I can get into it. So I really like that application. Any other thoughts, guys?
Maybe it's just the fact that like at the beginning you really don't want to do it, but once you start, you're like, it isn't as bad as I made it seem. Like you made it more dramatic in your head.
Yeah, totally. You give yourself the resistance sometimes.
For whatever reason, it's just human nature to imagine whatever upcoming task and reading to have the worst case scenario ever.
Yep. Okay, this is the last thing I want to cover. In the Renaissance, we have this idea of humanism. So there's Renaissance humanism. And this was new to me. I started studying this week and learned a few things. Humanism in today's world, that kind of is a bad word. Like it's not really a desirable thing. Can you tell me why, Elizabeth? Can you tell us a little bit about this?
It's kind of the mindset that humans are the center of everything and everything you need is within you, which kind of sounds good unless you can't, and then it feels like you're a failure.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, that sounds nice on paper and everything, but that is literally impossible.
I mean, we all
Humans
hit these points in
need
our life when
other
we're like, I
humans.
don't have the answers. I feel helpless. I don't know what to do. So if they're telling me that all the
Yeah.
answers lie within you, you can be anything you want to be, and you're like, I'm helpless. Like, I don't know what to do.
I feel like another thing is that's leaving out a lot of religious or like God from it. And so
Yeah.
we don't always have all the answers within us. Like half the time we need to go to God. Most of the time we need to go to God to have direction and answers. But so I feel like the idea is twisted and kind of backwards because although we have the capability to get those answers, I don't think it comes just from us. I think it comes from God.
Right. And that's an important leadership trait, is knowing when to look to God, for sure. All right, so Renaissance humanism, there's a difference here. It's focused on how the individual could better their surroundings and the people they interact with. So it's like secular humanism is looking at you as an individual. Renaissance human is looking at humans as communities, right? How to improve humanity in general. Communities. What did I say? That their surroundings. Do you see how the art and the science and everything in the Renaissance improved their communities and their surroundings? It inspired humans to be better creatures. So I feel like that's a really important takeaway just from this lesson altogether, right? As we look at leadership, how can we improve humanity? And are we just working on improving our own self? And that's important too, like this classical leadership and personal development. We need to focus on our own self so that we can then be a vehicle, an instrument to serve the world, right? If your health isn't good, it's harder to serve. If your mental stability isn't good, it's hard to serve. If your education isn't strong, it's hard to serve. So we do need to prop ourselves up in that way, but not so much from a place of power, like I'm so great, I can do anything I want. Then that's more godlessness. So I hope you're pondering this day. Maybe I'm gonna give you a journal assignment. Yes. Okay, this is spontaneous. Just to write on to reflect on what we talked about today. What did you learn? How does it inspire you to improve your education or your gifts so that you can improve humanity, your community, and your surroundings? So let's reword this. What did I just say? To be inspired and develop your gifts. Okay, this is your writing topic. You can get started. We have 8 minutes. That's enough time for me to post it. But just before we leave, let's reminder, next week we're gonna go to science, more modern, George Washington Carver. So do you have this book, The Man Who Talks with the Flowers? I
Yes,
haven't read
bet.
it yet, but I hear great things about this book. Like I would say, just like we did before, hey, we're going to talk about this person, find a YouTube video or Google them. You could do that, but my friend just really recommended this book as the way it's written and the things it focuses on. It's not focusing so much on his science. He was a scientist, but it's focusing on why he's a scientist, like his love of God, his awe with creation, his desire to serve humanity. So this sounds like a really inspiring book. It's a quick little book. So I hope you can get that and read it by next week. And if not, then Google something or learn about George Washington Carver. Okay. So let's go ahead and I'll post those two assignments and you can get started on this little journal entry. A paragraph or two would be fine. All right, Island. Thanks for a really great conversation today. I love it when you guys all participate. It really enriches it to get multiple perspectives. I heard from a few of you about your physical goal this week. Good job. Keep working on that for at least 2 more weeks. If you're late on defining your physical goal, please do that and look at the, let's see, is that in the Google Classroom? Today's assignment is to report on the first week of your goal and tell me how it's going, but some of you haven't set the goal yet, so make sure you talk to me about that. All right, everybody, we'll see you next week. We'll talk about George Washington Carver. Then we'll go back to some ancient Christians after that. Okay, bye.
Ready.